Okay, welcome to those of you that have just arrived. We're at 9 a.m. I would like to, I'll just let a few more people into the room here, talk a little bit about logistics. So you've arrived at our MMIRA Mixed Methods webinar this morning with Kathy Collins, Elizabeth Creamer, and Cheryl Poth. I'll be reading a very short introduction here in just a minute. We're keeping it short and sweet on that count. For those of you that have just arrived, my name's Juliana Barabbas. I'm with IIQM in the Faculty of Nursing here at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So welcome to our webinar this morning. We'll get going right away here so that, and just another reminder to all of you, we're going to be looking at about 35 minutes of presentation time this morning and taking all questions via the chat window. And in that chat window, I'll be reading off these questions at the end of the presentation. So they're leaving a good 15 to 20 minutes for questions. Okay, good to see everyone here. So a little bit about our presenters. Both Cheryl Poth from 2017 to 2018 and Elizabeth Creamer from 2018 to 2019 are past presidents of MMIRA, an extra M in there, and Kathy Collins is the current president of the Mixed Methods International Research Association, MMIRA. Poth is a professor, educational psychology at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. Kathy Collins is a professor, curriculum and instruction, University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas in the United States. And Elizabeth Creamer is a professor emerita, educational research, Virginia Tech in the United States. Each has many years of experience teaching mixed method classes and workshops, including in an online environment. Welcome to our three presenters.
Thank you. Thank you. Why, hello, good morning, everybody. This is Cheryl. I am going to start us off. I just wanted to, before I leave this MIRA beginning a slide here, I just wanted to give a little bit of a plug for the Mixed Methods International Research Association. If you don't know us, we are 5 years old. We are, you can find us at MIRA right there, wildapricot.org. And what you see is that we have webinars, we have archives, we have just launched a MOOC for members only. Our membership is quite inexpensive and accessible. So please go to our website, find out more about us. And we all feel very strongly that it can be a great resource for those interested in mixed methods. But on to this. So we wanted to provide just a little bit of a snapshot, literally, of us so you can tell who we are. Again, I'm Cheryl. Kathy, do you want to say hello so people can get to know your voice?
Oh, hello, everyone.
And Elizabeth?
Hi, this is Elizabeth Creamer.
Awesome. And so this is us. We have one of the things about MIRA that it has done for at least the three of us is it's brought us together over the last, more than 5 years, that we've all known each other, known of each other's work. But it is a great way of networking. And so one of the things that a common interest of ours is we've come together and done lots of discussions on teaching and learning about mixed methods. So let's get ourselves started. A little bit about our formal mixed methods training or teaching experience is that so for example, I teach a doctoral level mixed methods course on my campus. It was the first one on my campus of 36,000. It draws students from all over. It is a 13-week kind of typical, in-person kind of an idea with some online components. But I also teach in the master's level Introduction to Research Methods. And when you take that course from me, you get a really good introduction to mixed methods. When you take it from somebody else, you will usually get at least some, because I've brought that into the curriculum. But it is one of those things that what people tell us is that they want the earlier introduction to mixed methods, not just at the very end. I also teach short courses in mixed methods, sometimes in different places, 5 days, 3 days, and then workshops as part of continuing professional learning for both MIRA conferences and also for example, for IIQM, I'm doing a couple of workshops next week in Vancouver for a health conference. So those are the kinds of things that I do. Kathy.
As associate, I teach a PhD level mixed method research course it's taught online and face-to-face, and I do draw an interdisciplinary audience. At this point, I am the only person teaching mixed method research at the University of Arkansas. I was the first to start it, and though one other colleague joined me, he eventually left. So there's definitely a need for more courses to be offered to students.
Great.
And this is Elizabeth. We share something in that we all were the only one. I'm a Maritime now, so I say we're the only one teaching mixed methods. We probably all designed the courses. Being a Maritime, I probably taught the longest. I started teaching in the mid to late 90s. I taught at the undergraduate level. Mainly, though, I taught a mixed method research design course at the doctoral level. And like my two colleagues and friends, I'm very active in teaching workshops and short courses. I'm extremely enthusiastic about mixed methods, and I love to teach it.
Well, that's great. So hopefully what that's done is given you a little bit. The other commonality that I just wanted to point out here is that even though, I think I was probably the last one to graduate in 2008 with my doctoral degree, but none of us took a mixed methods course. I took my very first workshop from John Cresswell in 2003, and that's where I kind of got introduced to this kind of an idea, and I knew that it was going to be, I just had this feeling that it was going to be something that was going to be coming. And so the other thing that happened for me is when I got to my faculty position, is it actually has been a really lovely niche for me in my teaching. And so I encourage anybody, if there isn't a course where you are, that might be something that you might want to pursue. And so this webinar, we wanted to offer 3 perspectives on this idea. And so we have these 10 questions we'll get to as much as we can, but it's this idea that we wanted to give you a flavor of how do we see the teaching of mixed methods as different from other teaching, what influences our approaches to teaching, how have our approaches to teaching evolved over time. So we've all been teaching mixed methods for more than a decade. What topics do we typically teach? And to be honest, some of those topics are shifting, as the field evolves as well. What are some examples of assignments? And really, we're going to be talking more about like the purpose of the assignments. What evidence of learning do we emphasize in our teaching? So what do we want our students to be able to do? What challenges have we experienced? And hopefully we can give you a little bit of insight as to how we've mitigated those as well. And then we also wanted to share some of our top 3 teaching resources. And then the next step is where do we go from here in terms of how do we bring people together who are interested in this topic of teaching and learning contribute to the literature even. There have been a couple of special issues over the years on teaching and learning, but they haven't been done for a while. So we think that there could be some nice experiences that could happen there. And then again, the questions. And so please do put the questions that you have into the chat box, and Juliana has very kindly offered to do a little bit of a gathering for us. So if it's okay with everybody, we'll get ourselves going. So let's start with, what do we think is distinctive about teaching mixed methods? Elizabeth, do you want to start us off?
Sure. And one thing that's unusual about our approach here in this webinar is we're going to go back and forth between the 3 of us, in part to show overlaps as well as diversity. I'm going to guess that one thing we have in common, and one thing that you would experience, is that when you teach a methods-oriented class rather than a content class, in my experience, it's usually a very diverse audience from very different disciplines, bringing very varied levels of familiarity with research. It used to be that primarily people came in with some quantitative training, but often very little qualitative training. I think that's really shifting. So Cheryl?
Sure. And so again, as well, I experienced one of my favorite things about teaching mixed methods and the teaching methods in general is that my courses often draw people from all over campus. So the students get this ability to interact with students from all over campus. We have health, we have psychology, we have education, we have folks coming over from pharmacy. And so that's a really lovely way. But it does make us have to unpack some of the assumptions, because research methods, in different disciplines can often have different discussions. And there is a huge interest in mixed methods. I have a wait list every year, and it's very challenging if I can. That's one of the biggest things that I have. But people come in with the assumption that it's qual plus quan. And what they learn in the course is that, yes, you need those things, but it's actually a whole skill set beyond that. And I was telling Elizabeth yesterday, that's interesting for me, that I would say in most of my teaching of mixed methods, for a long time, I had people who had more quan, and I'm finding, even this year in my class, I actually have folks with more qual than I've ever had. And that to me is exciting, because I also think that reflects, there's been a number of articles around qual-focused mixed methods, and I think that that's a really nice almost direction in the field. Kathy.
I agree with my colleagues' comments, but what's different about online is, and this is good news, it allows for flexibility in prompting students to achieve their goals. The students have various writing assignments, and I use these writing assignments to allow myself to individualize the instruction for that particular student. Students can log in according to their schedules. Good news also, communication can be presented in different forms, emails, discussion boards, interactive software packages as examples, but there are distinct challenges associated with an online setting, and I'll be discussing those challenges later in the presentation.
Great. And so we wanted to give you a little bit of sense about how we're coming to mixed methods, because our approach to mixed methods teaching is definitely influenced by your teaching approach. And so my teaching philosophy, this is what we want to talk about here, is really about, especially at the doctoral level or when I'm working with many folks in my workshops, is this idea about I want to bring you to a place where you can connect with what you're bringing, but also then realize what you still need to know about mixed methods. And I want to support that. And I want you to be able to work on things that is of interest to you. And so I've been really influenced by a book that talks about creating significant learning experiences. And so that actually has, like a number of steps or things that you want to consider while you're developing your courses. Elizabeth.
Well, my own teaching philosophy comes, I guess, from a beginning in a career as a high school English teacher and reading teacher, then working with undergraduates and then doctorates, so it's a little bit of a combined. I think it is based in what you could call a learning partnership model. And central in that is learning by doing, by applying to an area of the student's interest. Sometimes that can be understanding mixed methods and how it's used in psychology or how it's used in sociology, or it can be trying to work a way through creating your own research project. So I've always found it extremely valuable. It keeps students much more engaged when they are actively involved in using the information they hear to do something with it. So that relates to those three parts.
This is Kathy. In 2011, I was involved in a study as a participant and as an author, where I was interviewed to give someone who allowed the group to analyze my approach to teaching. And the profile that turned up as a result of correspondence analysis resonates as true for me. One is I'm methodologically focused. Research questions and topics drive the methods, and I present detailed examples to the students to guide this process. I'm also application-driven. I have a variety of different opportunities to use their learning. They do critical readings, persuasive writing, analyzing data, critiquing the literature. And this input to me from them allows me to provide various forms of instructional feedback. I'm also structured. The structure is emphasized on the integration of theory, concepts, teaching strategies. And these are designed to meet specific goals and the sequence of teaching. In other words, my teaching incorporates a variety of specific and very sequential activities designed to build on the existing knowledge base of the students, but allow them to grow within the context of the course.
One of the things that I hear common to all of us is that I think, so I know for myself, I've definitely also participated in research about teaching as an instructor. And I've also studied my own classrooms and tried to figure out what are the key features that impact those who actually are taking my classes. And so that's actually been an important influence as to how my approach has evolved over time. Elizabeth, do you want to start this one?
Sure. When we think about how approach evolved over time, I would say that I started probably the same way that many of you started. I was a content person. Most of my research involved content. For a long time, I was exploring issues related to women's interest in science and engineering. And methods were second to me. They were important, but second. And honestly, when I started teaching mixed methods in the late 1990s, I had never, of course, been to a conference. They didn't start till later. I was very narrowly read and really kind of thought there was one way to teach mixed methods, and that is through the set of basic designs and the whole vocabulary associated with them. But as I work with students over time, particularly in their own research projects, I became, and I examined more and more examples of good mixed methods research. They emphasize more the complexity of the research, the fluidity of the research, the adjustment to shifting environments and needs. So I basically moved away from such a singular focus on basic designs. It's only one of several focuses instead of the central focus.
And so there's two things, this is Cheryl, is that, again, similar to Elizabeth, I started with a much more phase approach, because that's where the literature was at in the mid 2000s, was this idea about planning. These are the kind of almost like steps we had to do. And what happened to me is that I had lots of folks, even in my own work, there were all these skills that you had to kind of know doing mixed methods and planning mixed methods that we never talked about and that I couldn't find talked about in introductory textbooks. So I've shifted to a little bit more, I want to make sure I bring in some of the hidden curriculum. And so those are the things that are not apparent to most learners. And there are things like even the interpersonal skills, about the negotiation skills when you're working on a research team that involves people coming from all different perspectives. One of the papers I wrote was about how I became a boundary spanner, in terms so I talk about vocabulary across different types of, and how do we bring people together. And so now I've been working for the last few years on actually identifying mixed methods competencies. And I'm currently working on a book for the SAGE series around this idea about how then do we, and I've been piloting it for years now in my own teaching, because that's where a lot of good stuff comes from, is this idea about I'm asking students to identify what they bring into the class, what they want to learn, how they plan to learn it, and then we almost negotiate kind of these individualized learning goals that then complement kind of the class goals. And then the final assignment is actually reflecting on to what extent did they achieve their own personal goals.
This is Kathy. Building on what I mentioned earlier about what influences my approach to teaching, that remains consistent across the years that I've been teaching mixed method research. What is different now and has been an evolving difference, is I focus now on students' philosophical stance to recognize who they are as a researcher. How do they interpret data? What do they value as important data? And what are the best means that they believe in order to collect and analyze these data? I also place more emphasis on the idea of design. I expand it to incorporate research design, sampling design, and validity design. Sampling design is when you select a particular procedure to collect your data and the number of individuals within each strand that you're collecting the data from. Then I also talk about validity design, and this refers to what types of quality criteria do you use throughout the study in order to justify your conclusions. And I find that by expanding these levels, students have a better grasp that mixing is more complex than simply looking at the type of method one uses.
So I think what you're hearing from us, this is Cheryl, is that that we emphasize different things. And I know I myself am influenced on the things I'm reading, the things I'm thinking about. So for example, in the last course, I'm sure my students would talk about that I was really talking a lot about sampling, because I had been kind of grappling with what was being talked about in the sampling. So I think that influences then kind of, the weekly topics. I mean, in some ways, some of these topics will be embedded throughout, some of them are. And so we wanted to give you a sense of a little bit about what we're doing. One of the challenges, of course, we're going to talk about is simply time. But I believe, Kathy, were you going to talk a little bit about across these?
What we did is we put down in a listing of what are some of our topics that we covered, and we found there was quite a bit of overlap across the three of us. However, there was some slight variation on what we emphasize within our course. Just for clarification, how to write a research question is something that Poth does, and I assume Creamer does as well. It's just that the X's were missing. Sorry about that. But basically, these are the topics, and you might think of these as modules per se, or weekly topics, depending on the length of time that you'd like to focus on them. But they go across from the philosophical, which is broadly based. They move into what's really important, is the rationale and the purpose for mixing. One cannot assume in your audience would necessarily agree that mixing is the best approach for this particular project that you're doing, so you have to provide your rationale and purpose. We talk about design, and I mentioned earlier that design can be research design, sampling design, validity design. Moving into data collection and analysis. And then the importance of integration across all aspects of the research process when it's doing mixing. That is what distinguishes mixing from a mono-method approach. Yes, there's integration when using different methods associated with one genre, qualitative only or quantitative only. But what is distinct about mixing is that one has to make the argument that integration occurred. Quality, validity, use of visuals, and then communicating proposals and controversies. Differing perspectives are important to the three of us because it's important that students have the opportunity to grapple with the degree that there is controversy in the field and how one would respond to that in a measured way.
And
yeah,
it's really interesting. Oh, sure, go ahead.
Just add one thing. Recently, and I think this reflects a trend in the field, I have added units that are about inter-method mixing. I call it inter-method mixing. So mixed method case study, mixed method grounded theory, mixed methods and systematic reviews. So that has been a recent trend. And you'll see when we get to reading, you can accomplish this range of topics with multiple articles for each unit, which has some real advantages. Or you can use a single textbook, but a single textbook generally carries with it the limitation of a singular perspective unless it's an edited textbook. So these topics can be covered multiple ways, and with 2 or 3 readings a week, you can really get a good orientation to each of these topics.
And I think it's really interesting. This is Cheryl. I'll just comment on the last thing for this slide. I was thinking that perhaps we should have bolded the ones. So, for example, for me, integration has become, a much bigger topic than, and the same thing as the use of visuals as well for me has become a very big topic where probably data collection and sampling, data collection maybe, has become less for me. And we focus more on maybe data reuse or secondary analysis, because some of the things you can get in your other courses, and that I really want to focus on what distinguishes the mixed methods. But we do sometimes talk about how you can do data collection using technology in different ways. So I just think that these are quite interesting. And this has been a very interesting conversation for the three of us as well, as we begin to kind of see. Can I go on to the next one? Everybody good?
Let me just say one thing about integration to add to that. The line on here is implying that integration is like 1 week.
Yeah.
And really integration is probably woven strongly through the data collection. It's woven strongly through data analysis. So not to mention the other areas, so that really integration, I don't want people to think 1 week would be enough for integration.
I wonder if this is the kind of, maybe rather than weekly topics, this is a sequencing of introducing these topics that then kind of we circle back to as we kind of go on, perhaps. So these are our major assignments, and maybe, Elizabeth, do you want to start with us off on this one?
Yeah, again, you heard earlier the applied emphasis, and you see a variety in assignments here between the three of us. And that's a good thing, because it just shows you so many different ways to apply what is being learned. I definitely share with my colleagues in the importance of looking at examples in the literature, in content areas that interest the students. So there's always a very strong thread of evaluating or commenting on examples from the literature. I put that way up there as really, really very important. So maybe Kathy can talk next. She has a good variety.
I use critical responses on a weekly basis where students write a critique of the reading that they would read for that particular week. I find it's very useful because it gives me an indication of what they think is important, and I can use it as a teaching tool as I expand on what I think is important. Discussion boards on an online class are important because it allows students to interact with each other. It also provides a visual in the sense of text that I can see how their thinking is evolving as they go through the course. I also do a data analysis report to give them the opportunity to collect data. Of course, the 10 years I've been teaching this, or 12 years at this point, very rarely do students have the opportunity to collect data and analyze it. So they collect, and I teach them how to do a qualitative and content analysis to give them an opportunity to see how they can see patterns within their data. And the quantitative is descriptive because the students come in with such a varying levels of background that I find descriptive is something they all share. I also do a particular literature. Students go into their own area, whether it be health, education, sociology, and they do a critique of articles that use mixing within those particular disciplines. But it has to be something they think is stellar. In other words, I want to find out, are they able to, and they can, use what I'm teaching them and what they're learning in the course and apply it to the literatures in the form of critique. I find that it gives me these four aspects of teaching, of evidence from the students has been very useful in determining how they're going through the course.
And so this, sure. And so this is Cheryl. And so what even for us, this has been super interesting for us to realize that we might call our assignments different, but we're actually looking for kind of similar types of evidence. And so if I can, we'll go on to the evidence. And I think the evidence that we're looking for is the ability to apply the information in which we're talking. So as we're talking about what should be in a proposal or in a report, can you see that when we look at published stuff? Can you, or in my case, I do a written proposal, can you actually now apply that to your own learning? So for me, we're always looking for evidence of the ability to engage in, like, the behind the scenes, can you actually do this? And I know Elizabeth and I have talked about this a lot, about the need for actually looking at different disciplines and bringing in different perspectives, because one of the wonderful things about the field of mixed methods is that, is that people are coming from all these different disciplines. And that's why MMIRA has played such an important role of having methodological discussions across disciplines. And then for me, what's become very important is this idea is, can I take what's in the literature, and so much of what we talk about in our introductory text, it does, if I can present the data or the research process as being, very straightforward and very stepwise. And really, it's much, much more complex about that. So I want my students to be able to leave my course thinking about, where are going to be some of the dilemmas or the adaptations I have to make. And so that's where, in my work, I've been talking a lot about, more complex designs, more adaptive approaches. So, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I have to jump in there, Cheryl. This is kind of exciting. We always learn from each other as well as from the questions from students and comments from students. But this notion of interdisciplinary ties into these classes, because when you group them, for instance, by content area, you may not get that conversation about something that's being done in another area. So often when someone gets stuck, or they feel like they're stuck with their data or stuck with their procedures, if you expand your scope and say, if you're in psychology and you read a little bit about mixed methods in sociology, or if you're in health and you read a little bit about mixed methods in sociology or public policy, you can get some incredibly innovative ideas. The part that I'm going to emphasize in terms of learning, in addition to what Cheryl has said and Kathy will say, is this ability, which is a higher order of thinking, to begin to weave in knowledge from your reading, to actively use the reading, to get your students to actively use their reading as, say, they construct these critical evaluations of examples from their fields. So the whole process is a very integrative one in terms of weighing different perspectives and critiquing an article. So the ability to build in knowledge from diverse perspectives, methodologies speaking from diverse perspectives in mixed methods is, I think, really very critical.
Okay. The evidence of learning I emphasize is integration across all phases of the course, and also the idea of validity design is across all phases of the course and the overall design of the study. These particular areas are like modules. And what I ask the students to do is to take an idea of their own and develop, with my help, a conceptual framework associated with that idea. They then move into the planning phase, and they provide the rational purpose for mixing for their particular study, as well as the research design, etc. They then collect how we would collect data. So it has a slight proposal component to it, but not as detailed as a proposal. And then at this point, I ask them to then consider how do they intend to legitimate or validate their data. And then at the end, I ask them to think about how they intend to disseminate their conclusions. Who are their stakeholders? Now, this is more of a journal aspect to it, but keep in mind, I'm teaching along these lines throughout the course. So I'm giving them the tools to use to apply it to their own work, and then I go ahead and read their journals on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on when they turn it in, and I just give them feedback. It's not a grade per se. I just give them feedback so I can see how they're applying what they're learning to something they're familiar with, which is their own idea. And the reason I want to stress conceptual framework, which is number one, many times students come in without any idea on how to develop a conceptual framework. And this is one of the weaknesses that I see in the dissertation level. So I think that this is a good approach to giving them an opportunity in a very safe environment, because there's not a lot of points associated with this. I think it's like 10 points every time they turn something in. And I find they really like it. And I definitely see a growth in how they then can discuss what they're talking about relative to their own ideas as we talk in class, as well as I see how they are able to critique the literature, because they've had an opportunity to think of this relative to who they are as a researcher.
And so if I can, this is Cheryl, I'll jump in and say that one of the things that I think is common to all of us as well is that we give folks in our classes and our workshops a chance to, take leaps of faith, to have a safe environment to talk about their emerging understandings and to get feedback on things as well. And that's something, so that formative piece is very much embedded in my own class, and they get a chance to talk with peers without me listening, and then, sometimes with me listening. And so they can get lots of different perspectives on it. So let's talk about challenges. Elizabeth.
I'm going to identify two. I'll talk to the second one first, and then I'll go back to the first one. I worked in an environment with fellow faculty members in other content areas, many of whom were trained in the 80s. And although qualitative research was beginning to emerge in the 80s, almost all of these people are trained in quantitative research. And so I was often frustrated with students who would get all excited about doing a mixed methods project. They'd have a good rationale for using mixed methods. Their topic was well suited to mixed methods because the constructs they were pursuing were multidimensional. And they would come back kind of dragging their feet because some faculty member had told them that, it's not realistic to do a mixed methods dissertation. You can't do a mixed methods dissertation. And I often hear this in workshops that faculty trained in that era particularly discourage students. I think that's not a fair claim. One of the things I do in my own textbook is I purposely highlighted examples of mixed methods dissertations. I use them as exemplars. I think some of the most innovative mixed methods research is actually being done in dissertations. Cheryl's already touched on the first one. We all like simple answers. We all think things are tidy. We all like to set a schedule, and I know our students do too. They want to think, well, okay, I'll do the qual phase this month and the quant phase this month, and it's all tidy. But in reality, there is not one right way. There's no formula. You have to adjust it, which I think is a very big positive. You have to help students see the fit between the methods and their purpose, and the methods and their topic, and the methods and their resources. So the drive for the simple answer is one I think you'll find in many of your students. They want quick and dirty, and I don't think many people would say that mixed methods is a quick and dirty approach.
No, and this is a great one. So Juliana has very kindly told us we have about 5 minutes, and then we want to make sure we have time for questions, so I'm just telling us as presenters. So I'll be very quick here. Never enough time. Never enough time in webinars, courses, workshops. But I think the main thing I can say is that I'm very focused on what I prioritize. In terms of what we need to get done and what we like to get done. I always leave time in class, as well as workshops and webinars, to actually take those emergent questions, because that's what people want. They want to be able to talk about something as they need to. And again, the challenge for me is my focus on planning right now in my course is a lot of students leave going, okay, now I need something more. And I'm now trying to work on, is there an advanced class? Is there, I've done reading groups before which has supported. One of the challenges for me is that I get inundated by requests, being one of the only on campus, and I have to be careful of that. So lots of challenges. Kathy.
I'm right here. What I did is I went through an analysis of students' comments relative to when they critique my course at the conclusion of the course. I also did an analysis of students' journals, because embedded within the journals were questions about challenges. And I found a pattern. Basically, students were concerned about the critical reading skills they needed to understand the textbooks or the readings that I was giving to them. It was difficult for them. Persuasive writing skills, considering it's an online course, writing is critical in order to get across your ideas, and they found it difficult to be persuasive. They did improve. It's a difficult concept for them to adjust to. They had problems with the language of mixing, the concepts of mixing, how to actually get successful integration. And they also had problems with design and overall analyses. So it sounds like they had a terrible time, but they really didn't. But I did notice that this is what they talked about as they tried to negotiate their preset ideas about mixing to what they were learning in the course. I also did an analysis of my journal. I keep a journal. And some of the highlights was how to get students more involved in an online setting, how to juxtapose different resources to give a balance. The technological curve is critical. And also there's a complexity, as my colleagues mentioned, we're dealing with a variety of individuals who have different research skills and come from a variety of different perspectives. And that's it.
Awesome. So there's lots. And so the three of us each kind of went through, this is our last 3 slides of this presentation, is this idea about, there's an article, I love Pat Daisley's work on mixed analysis and integration. She has a fabulous book for 2018. I didn't put that one there because I don't use often that book in my course, but I certainly use this. This is a beautiful, what I like so much about this is this idea about metaphors for mixed analysis. And she's been ahead of her time for a long time. So this is definitely an article I like. I also I use Kathy's work in my own work and in my own teaching. And one of the things I love is there's a great article here about how to create significant learning experiences. And Elizabeth has really contributed to the literature around when people ask me, because I kind of talk about that there's mixed methods light versus mixed methods intensive. And if you're looking to kind of move towards the more intensive, then Elizabeth's book is a great one, and she's a great open access primer that I will often use as a reading in my educational workshops on mixed methods. And then one of the things that I developed and I've used in my class is my own book as to kind of complement some of the readings around how do you get to then tackling more complex problems.
It's really hard to pick the resources that you use the most. And one of the exciting parts of working with colleagues like Kathy and Cheryl is to use their work in class and really to embody the idea that these are evolving ideas. They're not, the field continues, the methodology continues to evolve in very, very exciting ways. And you see that, for instance, in Cheryl's own book about complexity. And I see the balance between design and philosophy. I mentioned Green's book only in part because she really gets into mixed methods as a logic of inquiry rather than a series of steps. Kathy's work on validity, her idea of research designs and validity is also one that I really use quite a bit. I loved one assignment, and I know we're running out of time, that I got this idea. I copied it from Cheryl. The idea, she actually has people review different books and see what they like about it, what they find useful, and that way, again, you really emphasize there are a lot of different perspectives, and the advantage of that is you can pick a perspective, your students can pick a perspective that is suited to them.
I typically use one core textbook, and I change the textbook pretty much every year because I'm trying to get a variety of different perspectives. This year I'm using Cheryl's book. Last year I used Vicki Plano-Clark and Natalia Ivankova's book. So I try to provide an outlet for students to get information from others other than just me. I also, this year, am using that articles in the special issue of IJMRA. If you go to this particular link, you'll have free access to a variety of different articles, which I find most of them are excellent. I've read most of them. I also use my own work, Validity and Multi-Method and Mixed Research, because I want to provide examples of what validity, how validity is reflected from a qualitative, quantitative, and a mixed perspective.
Awesome. Well, this now brings us to the end. I want to spend the last 2 minutes giving kind of our final piece of advice at like 9:56. At my time anyways. But right now, Juliana, if we can pass it over to you for the next 10 minutes or so to do some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cheryl. So for the benefit of those who are listening after the fact on the video, I'm just going to do a little recap of some of the questions that were covered in the chat window that are resolved. We had a question from Mabel regarding MMR to environmental sciences, some examples of applying that, ideally coastal management and conservation, and Cheryl responded that she is working with a graduate student from New Zealand working in MMR conference in SA. Cheryl's email is on the front slide, so those who are interested in that topic can also connect with Cheryl that way. There was also a question from Griselda regarding the study of migration, and Cheryl also pointed out that there is a special issue recently in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research on migration. Now looking ahead to Rebecca Bauer, do you have suggestions, and forgive me, my window just refreshed, do you have suggestions about books, materials, or just teaching recommendations for teaching applied mixed methods for practitioners? For example, like if you wanted to teach practitioners to study problems on their respective organizations. Let's see, Cheryl, do you want to take point on that one?
Sure. So one of the things I was trying to get at is I think when you're talking about practitioners, you're talking about kind of people already working in the field. And so, you know, one of the books that I will often give to folks when we are just as an intro, as a quick read, is actually John Cresswell's Concise Mixed Methods. It's quite inexpensive. And it just kind of gives you, you know, the problem with short books is that it's also very superficial, but it allows people to come to a research team and actually have an idea of what I'm talking about when we're talking about taking on mixed methods. I think the mixed methods research team stuff is being, people are doing some writing, and I think that that's a topic that we're going to see more research in. And kind of guidance in as well about how you develop the capacity of research teams. Because I think there's no longer the ability in mixed methods to say, you do the qualitative part, I'll do the quantitative part, and then we come in at the end. That is a very small very, small, one of the possibilities that you could actually do.
Now, let me jump in for practitioners. Two things I might suggest. Both of the handbooks of mixed methods research include, and there's three. There's a 2003 one, there's a 2010 one by Tasha Corey and Tedley, and then there's a great 2015 one by Hesse Barber and Johnson. Those have chapters about mixed methods, say, in public policy, mixed methods in health science. There are also many, like dozens and dozens of articles that look at prevalence of mixed methods in certain fields. And those often raise issues about unique challenges faced in the field.
But I agree with you. I certainly think handbooks are a good place to start. There is Routledge through Tony Onweg-Boozy and John Hitchcock are right now working on a handbook on mixed methods integration, if you can believe that, a whole book on integration. And I think that's going to contribute to the field greatly once it's out.
I just want to add, I think it's also important as you go through the literature, be sure to cite where you're getting your ideas from regarding mixing. There are a variety of different perspectives, and it's important that the audience knows where these ideas are generated from, because it gives more credibility to how you're designing or how you're talking about mixing. As an audience member, I may not agree with how you're mixing, but if I see a citation, I can at least know where you're getting your information from, so it gives a level of credibility to the overall process.
All right, Juliana, maybe we can go to the next one, if that's okay.
Absolutely. We did have a question from Elizabeth that at least one of the other participants jumped in on, and that is regarding prerequisites for students taking mixed method courses.
It is a great question, and the reason I say that is ideally I would love for people to have a rich qual and quant background. I'd like them to have had some exposure to mixed methods. But in my calendar, I actually just made our intro research course the prereq, because what that does in kind of coursework is it allows folks to come and get a sense of it. And then sometimes one of the studies I did of my own class is that students actually increase their interest and some skills in qual and quant by taking a mixed methods course. So I say just be careful that you don't want to, if you require courses for your course, then you are right now then constraining who can take your course. And sometimes experiences are more important.
Well, and she's right about the prereqs. I have found that no qual background is a difficult fit in terms of appreciating the real potential of mixed methods. So there's a little bit of tension there that people could overcome by some basic qual reading, perhaps, but that people that bring in entirely a quantitative mindset, though I don't divide people into qualitative and quantitative, struggle with the idea of an inductive, constructivist approach to data. So, I tussle with that question.
Actually, I'd like to respond to the question, why is it integration and not just the use of all methods possible? The idea of integration is that when you're using a variety of different methods, whether it be associated with one genre or whether it's just quantitative and qualitative, the idea that these methods are, the integration occurs when you use the results from each to develop coherent inferences about the topic of interest. And in some cases, one method is used to collect a specific type of data, and once analyzed, that analysis allows you to do something else to make a decision about subsequent data collection. So integration is not just about using multiple methods. It's using the methods strategically to obtain the best possible data set, and then use a variety of different techniques within your study, such as quality criteria, to allow you then to integrate appropriately this information and create a much fuller and richer explanation for the phenomena of interest that you're pursuing. Does that make sense?
There is a small stream, but a substantial stream. Now, it's a small stream, not substantial. There are a number of leading voices in mixed methods that have highlighted the potential to integrate different sources of qualitative data when you use analytical procedures that respect the tradition. So they talk about the difference, for instance, in analyzing data using discourse analysis or analyzing data using grounded theory and then integrating them. And I think that's pretty exciting too. I think there's some really interesting things coming out of that.
If I can, I'll comment then, is that I actually think it's very important to not just represent in my classes the established voices, but also the emerging voices. And so I bring in people virtually into my classroom. I try to pick different people each time, and I purposely pick kind of a combination of folks who I think are doing some really, and that's why I meet them at conferences. I meet them by being part of MMIRA. I meet them, in webinars, and this kind of stuff. And so that's how you get to know folks. And so, for example, one of the people that I met at one of my short courses, who is here is Leah. And she asked the question about, because she's very interested in mixed methods ethics, and she knows it's been an area that I think the field has been silent on in terms of, and I talk about how ethical considerations in mixed methods become intensified because we're asking often more of people, or we're asking, maybe for longer or for different things, different types of data from them. And so one of the things, which is what the massive online open course, the MOOC that was just launched from MMIRA, is that I did a module on mixed methods ethics. And so I think that those are great places for, almost like the topics that we don't think are being covered yet to kind of develop that. And I know Elizabeth and Kathy have both done modules. Do you want to talk about those modules that you've done in the MOOC quickly?
I have not done
We
one.
have someone here present who is on, Elizabeth Kuchner. I'm probably saying her name wrong. She is on the leadership team of the MOOC. We welcome her to being here, and she's played a very instrumental role in organizing the course material on the MOOC. I think we've launched 8. I don't know if she can unmute, but we've launched 8 modules. 10 modules. They will be open for a while, and this is accessible to members. These are structured more like a course. Unlike the webinar, there's not an interactive component. They're really structured. They have a study guide and review questions and those kinds of things. But we're very excited to be able to launch that benefit for our members.
So Juliana, I think we have time for one last question. Do you want to figure out which question we should ask? Because I can't.
Yeah, I'm just doing a quick scan here. You've covered ethics. I think there's been some discussion that refers to research team and perspectives. Let's see here, maybe from Mark. Can you reflect on experiences teaching and researching where the QT side is rich and sophisticated and the QL side is relatively token, simplistic topics and themes without opportunities for the more sophisticated range of QL strategies and analytic methods?
What study?
Very common. It's very common. I can comment on that.
Yes, please.
Most of the analysis until recently that has, and I guess maybe this is why priority mark is such a big issue in mixed methods and why there's recognition of the so-called embedded design, where it is often exactly what you just described. But I think that is changing. I think it's changing quite rapidly as we see more and more people that have methods training that extends across areas. We think just qual and quant, and we think one qual or one quant. But as we see people beginning to develop a more full array of expertise, you see that less traditional model, which I honestly think is a very positivist model where you're just applying a positive logic to qualitative data, which is really not respecting the integrity of those models. So I think we do have a comment from Elizabeth, who's on the MOOC leadership team. She said I did a great job explaining the MOOC. Oh, thank you. Lots of information on the front page of the MMIRA website. There's a video on the front page of the MMIRA website explaining the MOOC. The webinar next month is about the MOOC. And I also want to comment, this is a MOOC that has, this is a webinar that has quite a few MMIRA members in it. I recognize a lot of names, so I find that very exciting.
So if I can, Cheryl, I'll just make one final comment about the qualitative piece. I've just done my first few workshops around qualitative driven or qualitative focused, whatever you want, mixed methods. And so that is fairly, there's been examples, but that now I think that it's becoming a little bit more known in the field and understood maybe as a very important part of it. And so I think that that's very, very exciting. If I can, just to kind of finish up, can I give each one of us presenters a moment to say, if you had a piece of advice around teaching that you wish you would have known?
You better start, Cheryl.
Well, I would probably say, I wish I would have known that by taking this leap of faith, by offering this first mixed methods, what a wonderful door it would open for me in terms of mixed methods research has become one of my major streams and contributing back to advancing. And I think that that's been personally very satisfying. And it's allowed me, in some ways, we're not constrained by 50 years of teaching mixed methods, to be perfectly honest. I think the next decade, we're going to come out with some really interesting approaches and more examples of kind of how to do this.
More variety, yeah. I would jump in and say, without deliberately putting in a plug for MMIRA, there is nothing more influential to either a student or a teacher than attending a mixed methods conference. So I did not attend my first conference until the first MMIRA conference, which was in Boston. What was that, 2014, 2015? And to see everyone, I think, experiences this, to see so many people doing so much dynamic and diverse research from so many different countries really expands your horizon beyond maybe that one textbook that you read, and if you were so lucky as to take a course.
I understood the question of what would I do differently? What would I think differently when I first started? Is that what it is?
Wherever you want to take it is fine, Kathy.
Okay, well, I was just thinking, either explicitly or implicitly, I want to avoid making assumptions about what students can do within a mixed method course based on their prior experience with research. I find that I try to avoid making that distinction because many times I'm surprised on how well someone who does not have a strong research background does in the course because he or she or they apply themselves such that they benefit from the instruction. So I try to avoid thinking about it in that sense. It's a lot easier online because I can just hide the names. You know what I mean? But because right now, at this point when I'm online, I basically recognize their writing, but I wouldn't know them in person. Do you know what I mean? So I have to avoid that kind of, because I asked about their background initially because it helps me figure out where I'm going, but I don't necessarily know who's saying it. I try to avoid labeling anyone within a particular context. But I think it can shortchange the amount of instruction, shortchange how well I can do it from an instructional perspective.
That's great. Thanks, Kathy. And I wonder if, I'll finish on a very controversial note, that I wonder if maybe the qual-quant, won't be the only types of data that we begin to mix. Right. I think there's lots of other types, and I wonder if if it's going to be post, kind of that at one point. Just to kind of wrap up today, we want to thank you so much for joining us. As you can see, the three of us are doing a lot of talking and thinking about the kind of teaching of mixed methods. We are conceptualizing right now a special issue on teaching and learning in mixed methods. And if you're interested in being contacted about future opportunities, keep watching. We've talked about doing some sort of kind of group or chapter or something, which we haven't quite got off the ground yet, but keep your eyes out. I think the important thing is that in order for us, for the next generation of researchers, or if you're in that group, that I think the teaching of mixed methods, the exposure of mixed methods, whether it's on your own campus or whether it's at a conference or at a webinar, is really important, and that we all have a role to play in advocating and teaching others about the value and about the emerging field of mixed methods.
Chat box is fun to watch. Lots going on in the chat box. Lots of good comments and feedback. Thank you, everyone. This is really fun.
And thank you to our three three presenters, to Cheryl, to Kathy, and to Elizabeth. Thank you so much for today. For all of our attendees, again, we'll have a video of this presentation available in about a week's time, along with the slides. And picking up on the comments on the chat window, I might do a cleanup and actually post some of the discussion that happened in chat, because there seemed to be a lot of good back and forth in terms of question and answer within chat. So we'll have that available in, again, about a week's time. And as Cheryl was saying earlier in the presentation, coming up on November 12th, Peggy Shannon Baker at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time is our next Mixed Methods webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.